Hi, everyone. Welcome to a new practice. Today, we'll look at a sequence designed for hip release and mobility. So, we'll look at a mix of some mobility practices as well as a little bit of stretching, hopefully, to just bring some freedom and spaciousness through our hip joints in all different directions. So you may like to have some blocks today. They're not necessarily necessary, but if you do have them at home, it's always nice to have them nearby just in case. And that's kind of it. If you have any other props that you'd like to use, please feel free. And as always, with every practice that we do here, everything is totally your choice. So if you ever need to stop or move in a different way, pause the video, take breaks, all of that's great and totally okay. So it's really important that this becomes your practice and that you're honoring your experience, your body, and your needs in any given moment. So the invitation today is to begin laying down. You could set yourself up somewhere in the middle of your mat. You may like to have your knees bent with your feet to the floor, or you could extend your legs long. So we'll take a couple moments here just to arrive and set the tone for practice. And then we'll move into our sequence. So feel free here if you'd like to take a few deeper breaths, maybe utilizing an inhale through your nose and a sigh out the mouth. You could do a couple more like that if that feels good. And at any point, you could return to a natural pace of breath, whatever that feels like for you. And an invitation here to place your hands towards low belly. And you could just rest your hands here softly, maybe just tapping into the rhythm of your breath as your belly rises and falls as you breathe. And if possible, if it feels good for you today, could you start to invite some softness through the low belly, maybe through the fronts of your hips? Maybe having your hands here could be helpful in facilitating that bit of release, just a little bit of a biofeedback here. Maybe softening your muscles. If you have your knees bent, you could really have the knees collapsing in towards one another, and that might help facilitate a bit more of that release as well. Just know if you have tension held in this area, that's totally fine. You don't necessarily need to let go of it. It's more of a suggestion. And so one thing to keep in mind is that we all have very different bone structures. So even though we are, made up of the same bones in general, the shapes of our joints, the angles, the even the kind of shapes of our bones themselves are all very different person to person. And so we all have very different ranges of motion within our joints, and then adding in the layers of connective tissue and musculature and nervous system response, that all plays into our different levels of mobility, movement, flexibility, all of that. And so what you might keep in mind today through your practice is just that thing about honoring your own body and your own experience. So practicing ahimsa, this is non-harming in yoga, one of the yamas or ethical guidelines of practice. So you could really take this opportunity to just notice where you are today. And maybe if you notice that there's that kind of creeping in of comparison or striving or wanting to push yourself, um, could you come back to this idea of variation in our bodies, variation in our experiences, and just know that wherever you are today is totally great, right? We don't need to try to be anything other than we already are. And so if your knees are not already bent, you could start to bend them now. Place your feet to the floor and then widen your feet toward the outer edges of your mat. From here, option to stay in stillness with your knees touching, or you could begin to gently lower your knees side to side. Your arms could stay on your body, or you could spread them towards the sides of your body. If you decide to lower your knees side to side, you may start small and just kind of gradually work your way into more range of motion if that's what's right for you. Just beginning with a little bit of gentle mobility here through hips, low back. You may even like to turn your head in the opposite direction of your knees. Or windshield wiper legs. You could finish up with a couple more cycles like this. And just keeping in mind, you can always go longer as well if that's what you're feeling like doing. When you're ready, you could come on back up to center, and then from here, draw both knees up towards you. You could have your knees more together or wide, whatever feels best in your body. And so from here, could you start to draw your knees up towards you a lot? Okay, and maybe just notice your lower back here as you do this. So for some of us, as we draw knees up, the tailbone will lift off the floor quite a lot and kind of curl upward. And so from here, could you extend your arms and your knees away from you so that the back of your hips kind of rest back on the ground a little bit more? So noticing that connection between hips and earth. And then as you start to draw your knees back towards you, could you keep that connection of hips or kind of back of your tailbone to the earth? So we're moving now from the hip joint instead of the spine. So it may mean that your knees don't come as close to your upper body, and that's okay. Okay, and then we'll kind of oscillate between these two. So knees draw away from you, and then knees draw back towards you. So a slow and subtle movement here. Just again, a bit of mobility, a bit of warm up for the hip joints. You may like to add breath here. So as you exhale, knees draw towards you. And as you inhale, knees draw away. You may like to really slow your movement down to the pace of your breath here. This can be a soothing action for our nervous system when we tie movement to breath. We could finish up here with a couple more. Next time your knees are toward you, you could keep your right knee drawing in and place your left foot to the floor or extend your left leg long. You may like to keep a little activity through your left foot, so maybe flexing your toes and having your toes kind of pointing back towards you and kind of up towards the sky. Just move those blocks out of the way there so you might see what I mean by that. Okay, and then from here with your right knee lifted, you could begin to make circles with your knee. So you could keep your hands on your knee as you do this. And let your hands do the movement here. Or for a little bit more engagement and including core engagement, you could release your hands and move your knee freely. So this is more of an active range of motion here. And as you feel ready, you could switch directions. Again, seeing about keeping your movement fairly controlled, mindful. And in your own time, you could come on back to center with your right knee. Maybe take your hands to your knee. And let's keep the left hand on your knee this time. And you could start to draw your leg across your body. And so here, you may find that keeping your hips on the ground, drawing your knee across, will produce a bit of a stretch through your outer hip. Okay, and if so, that's where we'll probably hang out. Okay, but if you're not getting quite enough, you could either start to straighten your leg a little bit or even roll more onto your left hip. So there's a little bit of variation here that you can experiment with. We're looking for perhaps a bit of stretch or sensation in through the outer hip, your right leg here, but nothing too intense. Just a little bit of gentle stretching. And you may find that that could be increased by pressing your hand into your knee and then your knee back up against your hand. So you're creating a little bit of a resistance point between the points of contact. And just checking in that you're at a place that feels manageable, right? So not producing too much external stress or other stress throughout your body. We're really focusing on the hip here. Okay, and in your own time, you could come on back to center, hug your knee towards you for a moment. And it's very possible that, especially if you were creating that pressure between hand and knee, there may have been some engagement of the inner thigh as well. Okay. And so from here, you could replace your foot to the floor. If any movement would feel good for that leg, feel free to do that before switching sides. Okay, and when you're ready, you could draw your left knee up. Okay, again, maybe just giving it a squeeze. And while you do that, engaging the right leg a little bit, so keeping both legs a bit active, toes drawing back towards you. And then you could introduce your circles at any time. So again, either hands or hand to knee, or you could do this without hands at all. And so a lot of yoga really emphasizes flexibility, but just as important is mobility, and mobility is the movement of our joints. So that's kind of more of the focus today. And then we'll do a little bit of stretching work as well to release after some of the more engaging practices. Okay, switching directions if you haven't already. And come on back to center as you're done with that, and we'll take that little stretch across the body. So again, hips could be on the earth, or you may roll a little bit more. If you do kind of lift your hip up, this will be a little bit more rotation through the spine as well. So just checking in with your low back. Perhaps noticing if you could keep your upper body fairly soft here. If you find your shoulders start to creep up towards your ears, that can sometimes be a sign that we're a little far into a stretch or a sensation, and it might be a way to kind of gauge whether or not to adjust where you are. And as you're ready, come on back to center. Again, you could draw your left knee up towards you just momentarily here. Feel free to introduce any movement that feels good. You could even come back to your windshield wipers. So from here, perhaps drawing both knees towards you once again, and then beginning to rock along your spine. So you may like to rock back and forth a few times to get some momentum to come up towards a seat. And we'll find a seated position just for a few minutes here. And we'll start with a butterfly shape. So that's feet together, soles of the feet together, and knees to the sides. From here, you could begin to first set up your seat. So actually, let's maybe roll the outer thighs and upper buttocks out from underneath so that you're sitting a little bit more directly on your sitting bones, or like the bottoms of your hips. Okay, and then from here, you can adjust how close your feet are to your body. So you can just see what would feel better for you. And then as you've kind of arrived, finding an upright posture for your spine, could you press your feet together? So it doesn't have to be super intense. Again, just like finding that place of moderation. So there's a little bit of engagement here, but not like really intense holding. Okay, and so notice for a moment what happens when you press your feet together. You may even let your feet relax for a second and release that pressure. And then once again, engage by pressing your feet together. So kind of starts to activate the muscles of the legs, perhaps particularly in through inner thighs towards the hip joints. So from here, you could keep that pressure of the feet going, and then start to draw your knees up a little bit. So just however high they want to go. And then we'll slowly lower knees back down. So this can start to kick up in intensity pretty quick. So take your time, take breaks. We won't do too many, but continuing this movement here, you may like to add some breath. So you could here actually exhale as you lift the knees up, and inhale as your knees release, and maybe let go of a little bit of that engagement on the way down. Then press the feet together. Knees lift, maybe on the exhale, that's the harder part, right? And then maybe inhaling as things kind of settle and maybe release a bit. So an invitation to do 3 more like this. This is why we'll be doing some release work at the end of the video as well. Awesome job. If you're experiencing like shaking or trembling here, that's normal. That means that your muscles are working, okay? And it's possible that maybe they're working in ways that are different than they're used to. Okay, when you're ready there, you could release that, and we'll take a little bit more of a relaxed version. So you could release that really strong pressure between your feet. Maybe your knees kind of just release to the sides naturally, and you're welcome to bring in a little bit of movement. You could even take a bit of a forward bend here. We'll just spend a moment finding a bit of ease if possible. And if another body position would feel better, then absolutely feel free. You could continue what you're doing here for a few more cycles of breath. Okay, and coming back up if you're in a forward position as you feel ready. And then from here, you could swing both legs around to the side. So it doesn't really matter what side you're on first. So we'll be in this kind of staggered position. So this is a real mobility practice. If you have a block with you, you could use a block. This is a way to kind of make it a little bit more silly and fun, and also give us a bit of an external focus, which can sometimes make movement a little bit more accessible. So if you do have a block, you're welcome to place it on your head. That's right. Okay, and laughing at yourself is encouraged here. Okay, and then you may begin to take your hands behind you, finding a real lift to the front of your body. Okay, and then as you feel ready, you could start to lift your knees up and guide them over the opposite direction. So you'll be shifting your placement on your hips. I'm just gonna rearrange myself here. So one hip will probably lift as you do this, and that's okay. Okay, so you may like to just kind of move side to side here. See how that goes. It does not matter how far down your knees land, okay? If they don't touch the floor, that's totally okay. Again, remembering that we all have very different shapes to our joints, our bones, very different experiences in our bodies. It's working where you are. If this is going well for you, you may like to release your hands. See how that feels. I find sometimes too, this kind of scoots me across the floor. So if you're ending up in a different place in the room, that's totally okay. And, you know, if the block falls off once or a lot, no problem. You can always just put it back or not use it at all. And you could continue this for a few more cycles. So here we're really working with our active range of motion, which means we're not using an external object to kind of pull us into this shape or movement, but instead we're relying on our body to work within its own natural range. Okay, awesome. So we'll let that go. You could put your block to the side. And I'll invite you to join me in tabletop from here. So that's hands and knees. You could set your hands about outer shoulder width apart with your fingers spread wide and your knees resting underneath your hip bones. And so here, if you'd like to introduce a bit of movement through the spine, you're more than welcome. You could inhale as your belly lowers, your heart and tail lift, and exhale as your back body rounds, maybe gazing at the floor. And perhaps a few cycles of this cat and cow movement. And if any other types of movement here would feel good in your body, feel free. So you can get really experimental and explore here if you'd like. And an invitation to continue for a couple more cycles of breath here. And as you feel ready, making your way back to neutral. So a neutral spine. And just a note, if you find that your hands or wrists are getting quite sensitive with this weight bearing, you're welcome to go down onto forearms. Okay? Or some people like to lift up onto fists. So those are a couple options. Okay, so from here, you could find that neutral. So maybe having your belly button drawing back. The neutral would be kind of halfway between these two, like the cat and the cow movements. So finding that position and holding that as best you can. You might begin to lift your right foot sort of so the sole of your foot is pointing towards the sky. Okay, so your foot is flexed here. Okay, and we'll do a couple little lifts for the hips. So starting to lift your heel up and then lower. Just a few repetitions. As you do this, you could really think about keeping your spine as neutral as possible. So we're trying not to arc and collapse into the spine, but instead keeping everything really integrated and just moving from the hips. This is a fiery one. Okay, so if that's your experience, that's very normal. And we could finish up with a couple more. So now we're getting a little bit more into the backs of the hips. Okay, and then as you're ready, we could switch sides. Nice, slow and controlled movement. Again, trying to keep spine neutral. Might just be a small movement here. Finishing up with another couple of these. And feel free to release that. So I'll invite you to find a child's form here, big toes together, knees wide. Okay, you could lower your head towards stacked forearms or towards the floor. And you might like to take this opportunity just to really sink in and settle, do a bit less here. Maybe finding some spaciousness in through the back body, through the backs of your hips. You may also like to just notice what's here for you right now. So what sensations might be present, thoughts, maybe more of an emotional type experience. Just meeting yourself here with compassion. And you could stay here for another couple breaths. Again, you can always stay longer if you'd like and pause the video. And an invitation to slowly make your way back up to your table. We'll take a little bit of a stretch through the back of the leg. So you could send your right toes behind you with the toes on the floor, the ball of your foot on the floor, and your heel pressing away from you. You may like to kind of extend the crown of your head forward. So again, trying to find that neutral position for your spine and creating some length from the sole of your foot all the way through the crown of your head. You could be still here or you could rock a little forward and back. And in your own time, feel free to switch legs. Great. And we'll place both knees back to the floor and kind of rise up into a high kneeling position. So if you feel that having some extra padding for your knees would be helpful if they're feeling a little sensitive, you can put a blanket or cushions or whatever you have underneath your knees. Okay, you could bring your hands to your hips. Start to transfer your weight into your left knee and step your right knee forward. So even that is practicing this active range of hip mobility. So if you want to have your hands to the floor while you do that, you totally can. This is just a little extra something. So you might even step back to kneeling on both knees again and just try that out a couple times. Okay, we'll end up in a bit of a lunge position here. Okay, again, you can have hands to the floor, hands to blocks, hands on thigh, whatever feels good. Okay, you may have your back toes tucked under. This can help kind of stabilize through the pelvis. And so here we'll just look at a little bit of a release through the hips. So you could think about maybe lengthening your tailbone down. Okay. Finding a bit of a lift through the front of your body. You could keep your hands where they are, or some people may like to reach arms up. And an invitation to hang out here for a few cycles of breath. Some of you may even like to pick up your back knee and end up in a higher crescent lunge. That's great. Or you could keep your knee down. Awesome job. So as you feel ready, go ahead, bring your hands back down. Well, you could bring them to the floor if they weren't already there. Okay, good step back to your table. And then we'll rise back up into the high kneeling position. And we'll switch sides. So you could practice stepping your left foot forward, and you may even step it back and do that a couple times. And it would be okay if you kind of circle your leg around and step forward, right? Okay. And then as you feel ready, you could set yourself up again for your lunge. Okay. So not too many cues here. We're really just focusing on getting into the hips. So just checking that you feel nice and stable, lengthening tailbone down. Okay. Your legs could be kind of energized and hugging in towards one another just for a little bit of stability and engagement. And then placing your hands wherever you'd like. One option could be reaching arms overhead. Okay, and again, if you'd like to lift your back knee, please feel free. We could hang out for another breath or two. And as you're ready, you could bring your hands to the floor, step your knee back. You'll end up in your table. If you'd like to take a child's pose, you're welcome. Maybe welcoming a bit of release. Finding support from the surface beneath you, resting down. And as you feel ready, you could come on back up nice and gently and make your way once again to laying back down on the floor. An invitation to set yourself up with both feet to the floor, knees bent. And you could cross your right ankle over your left knee. So for some, this may be a great place to hang out. So this particular form, we're kind of targeting, again, the outer hip of the right leg. Okay. And so here you could stay, or you could draw your knees up towards you, maybe catch the back of your left thigh or hold on to your pants. If you have a yoga prop that you want to use to help facilitate this, that's great. Okay, you could keep a little activity through both feet again, maybe flexing your feet a bit. Okay, and you could stay where you are in this sort of central still position. Or you could explore a little bit of movement here. So you could see what it might be like to rock a little side to side. If you notice any areas that feel interesting, you could pause there. Just checking if your upper body could remain as soft as possible, even though it's still working, obviously, but could you invite that kind of easefulness as well? And regardless of where you're at here, an invitation to hang out for a few more cycles of breath. When you feel ready, you could release your left foot back to the floor. Uncross your ankle, maybe take a bit of a constructive rest in between sides. So again, that's feet wide, knees touching, finding some softness perhaps through the lower half of your body. And whenever you feel ready, you could go to the other side. Just taking some time here to find what feels right for you today. Always honoring your current experience. We could be here together for a few more cycles of breath. And when you're ready, feel free to release that. Again, you may like to come back to constructive rest. You could find stillness or windshield wiper legs. If any other movement would feel better, then feel free to do that as well. It's always going where feels best in the moment. Okay. And to close our practice, a couple different options. Option number one is to find a reclined butterfly. And here you may like to use your blocks. So you could have your feet together, the soles of the feet together, knees kind of open towards the sides, and the blocks can support you there. If a different position, if Shavasana with your legs extended long would feel better, or even if seated would be more suitable, then you can go ahead and set yourself up how you like. I'll just take a few minutes here to invite that sense of ease back in. Some of the stuff we looked at today is surprisingly fiery work, so find a balance here, bringing some neutrality and balance back into the body. You might like to notice if you could soften muscles around your eyes, maybe through your jaw, separating your teeth a bit. Maybe noticing shoulders heavy, rooting down into the earth. Your hands, your arms can rest wherever feels comfortable, safe, and supported. Perhaps noticing belly is naturally rising and falling with breath. Inviting that certain sense of softness through the muscles of your low belly, and the fronts of your hips. Regardless of where you're positioned, maybe finding that same sense through your legs. So perhaps allowing them to really be supported wherever they are. I'm using a little bit less effort now. And we could take the next few moments together Just to invite this sense of rest. Time to allow our practice to integrate not just into our physical bodies, but also on a more subtle level, maybe energetic, maybe emotional. And an invitation here to gradually start deepening your breath. Really take your time here. Maybe finding a bit of a feeling of brightness, aliveness with your inhales. And settling into yourself with your exhales. If you've been in a butterfly shape, you could gently guide your knees back up to the middle. And maybe I like to find some windshield wipers here. Again, just bringing some really gentle and supportive movement in. Nothing too intense or anything like that. Just beginning to wake things up. You like to turn your head side to side. You could take a stretch here, moving in any other way that feels good. And if you've been laying down, I'll invite you to roll to one side and very gradually start to transition upright. And as you come to a seat of some kind to close your practice, perhaps an opportunity just to check in and notice the quality of your experience, what's going on for you right now as you end your practice. Perhaps joining both palms together in front of your heart. And you may like to close your practice with a bow. And I thank you so much for joining me today. Until next time, take care.